So I'm going to show you a war that is being fought in your country right now. And this is a real fight over land, over money, and over who controls the electricity that you depend on. And I'm going to show you why you're already losing it, even though nobody told you that this war had already begun. Well, let me show you 3 things that happened and tell you what connects all of them. The very first, in Pennsylvania, someone restarted the 3 Mile Island. The site of the worst nuclear accident in the history of America was switched back on for one purpose: to power a single tech company's computer. Secondly, Google, one of the most powerful companies that have ever existed, signed an agreement to voluntarily switch off its own artificial intelligence when the power grid tells it to. This is a $1 trillion company that signed its own leash. And finally, on stage in Texas, the most powerful money manager on earth was asked a simple question: where will the trillions of dollars needed to power all of this come from? And he said, much of this money is going to be coming from the private sector, from the savings accounts and from the pension accounts.
And so much of this money, not just the private, is going to be coming from the private sector, from savings accounts, from pension accounts, from insurance companies, and on and on and on. The whole world is in need of improving the infrastructure.
It was one sentence, but it explained everything. 3 clues: a reactor put out of a graveyard, a giant putting itself on a leash, and a banker pointing calmly at your retirement account. Here's what connects them. There is a war going on over electricity, because the machines we are building need more of it than the country can produce. And the people fighting that war have started doing desperate, extraordinary things to get it. And everyone is staring at the wrong thing. They are watching the robot get smarter and they are watching ChatGPT. But no one, absolute no one, is watching the wire. Well, this isn't a video about how AI works. It's a video about how the world actually works, who's really fighting, what they are really taking, and why the people who end up paying the most were never part of the conversation to begin with. So every war has a first shot, and this one was fired in a podcast and almost nobody noticed. April 2024, Mark Zuckerberg is being interviewed, and hours into the conversation, he casually says something that started all of this. He says that the chip shortage, the crisis the entire industry has been losing its mind over for the last 2 years, is basically finished, solved. And then he tells you what's next.
At what point does it stop being worth it to put the capital in? But I actually think before we hit that, you're going to run into energy constraints, right? Because I don't think anyone's built a gigawatt single training cluster yet. Like, getting energy permitted is like a very heavily regulated government function.
Not ships, not money, but energy. We would probably build out bigger clusters than we currently can, he says, if we could get the energy to do it. Now, here's what this actually means. This is one of the richest men who has ever lived, a man who can buy almost anything on the planet with just a phone call. And he is telling you, almost casually, that he has finally found something that money can't buy fast enough. One AI training cluster, he says, needs about as much power as a serious nuclear power plant. One building, one model, a nuclear plant's worth of electricity. And that's the first shot, because the moment a man like that admits something that money can't buy fast enough, the balance of power begins to shift, and the people who controls it suddenly matters more than the people who can afford it. Now, watch what happened next. Not deals, but attacks. Companies doing things that they would never normally do because they were desperate. Microsoft brought back 3 Mile Island. The reactor had been shut down for years, written off and left dormant. Microsoft agreed to help restart it, not to power a city or to power a factory, but to feed its data centers. That isn't a normal investment. It's what a company does when it has money, ambition, and one problem it can solve fast enough, and in this case, which is power. And Amazon bought a power plant, not electricity from a plant, the plant itself. When you can't buy enough power, you buy the infrastructure that produces it, and that's exactly what Amazon did. And Chevron changed the entire game. The oil giant started building power generation aimed directly at artificial intelligence data centers. For years, Silicon Valley talked about leaving fossil fuel behind. Now to build AI, it was turning back to the companies that know how to produce energy at scale. And then there is Google. And this is the one that actually left me cold. Google agreed to reduce part of its AI computing load when the power grid comes under stress.
The other thing is we spend a lot of time thinking about how we can be more flexible in the system during times of grid stress, and that's something called demand response.
Think about what this means. The grid can now ask one of the most powerful companies in the history to slow down, and Google agreed. Not because it wanted to, but because it needed access to power. 4 moves: a reactor raised from the dead, a tech giant buying a nuclear campus outright, and an oil company draft into the AI race, and lastly, a $1 trillion company agreeing to switch off on demand. These aren't press releases. They are battle reports, and every one of them traces back to the same sentence Zuckerberg said out loud: we can't get enough power. So the obvious question is, why can't they just build more? Well, there is a reason for that, and it's because you can't just download a power plant. Software moves at the speed of money. You can raise $1 billion in a week, and you can ship a new model overnight. Tech has spent basically 20 years training everyone to believe that anything can be built instantly if you throw enough cash at it. But the problem is, electricity does not work that way at all, because you can't build a power grid overnight. A single transformer, a hunk of steel and copper sitting on the grid, can now take years to deliver because everyone is trying to buy one of these at the same time. A new transmission line has to be approved, challenged, and built across hundreds of other people's land. And for 30 years, America has barely built any of this because electricity demand was flat. Factories left the US, appliances got more efficient, and the grid stopped growing. Then artificial intelligence, electric cars, and returning factories all slammed into this frozen grid at the same time. Demand is not raising upward while the machines that supplies moves at the speed of a concrete. Well, that gap between what tech needs now and what the grid can deliver in years, that gap is the entire battlefield. Everything in this war is a fight for who gets too little power that exists, while everyone waits for more. And it's the oldest story in America, the railroad boom. Everyone watched the train, the speeds, the cargo, the future, but the fortunes were made underneath. The people who owned the lands, the rails had to cross, the people who owned the steel, the coal that fed the engine. And the train was the show, but the wire was the money. And AI is the exact same trick. Everyone is watching the models get smarter, but almost nobody is asking who owns the wire. Now, here's where this stops being about corporations and start being about a person. Because a war over wire has to be fought somewhere, on real land, next to real homes. And it's being fought the hardest in Loudoun County, Virginia. Now, there is nowhere on earth that has more data centers, windowless buildings the size of shopping malls, running 24 hours a day, consuming staggering amounts of electricity like this very county. And to feed them, the county is being threaded with new transmission lines and new substations, steels, and wires stretching across neighborhoods just to reach these very machines. There is a woman who lives there. She never asked for any of this. She didn't invest a single dime into these data centers, and she's probably not going to make anything from artificial intelligence. Well, I can prove a specific bill went up because of a specific data center. Nobody can, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But here's what we do know. Utilities have raised rates. Data centers are one of the major drivers behind massive grid expansions, and Virginia's regulators are now arguing publicly on the record over a single question: who pays to build the grid that these data centers actually need? Is it going to be the $1 trillion companies moving in, or the families already living there, the taxpayers' money? Well, that fight is real, and it's happening in her state right now, and she's not the only one. Across the country, towns are showing up to zoning meetings to fight these data centers over the noise, the water, the land, and the power bills, ordinary people versus the richest companies on earth. Well, that's not a metaphor. That's a Tuesday night meeting in a gym school that everyone is talking about. And here's why almost nobody is truly angry yet. Because the cost is invisible. It's not a tax. There is no vote. It arrives at a slightly bigger number on a bill you already pay without reading. You cannot fight a line item you never noticed. That is the genius of the waging war over the wire. The wire was already there. The public already built it. It's just being quietly repriced underneath them. And it gets a lot darker. Utility executives are now warning out loud that there may not be enough power to go all around for everybody, that the light themselves are about to be at risk. So follow this to the end. If the power ever actually runs short, who gets caught first? The data centers running $1 trillion model, or the woman in Loudoun County? And this is actually crazy because she's helping to pay for a machine that may one day be ruled more essential than she is, and nobody on stage is talking about her. Now, so take a step back and look at the whole battlefield, because now you can finally see it. There are 4 armies fighting over the wire, and you've already watched every one of them make its own move. The hyperscalers, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, the richest companies on earth, companies that spent years believing that money could solve basically any problem until they discovered one thing that couldn't solve fast enough. You watch them restart reactors, buy power plants, and sign agreements that they would never imagine that they would have to sign. And next you have the grid, the utilities and the system operators, the only people who can actually tell these $1 trillion companies to wait, and the people who decide who gets connected and when. And you have the incumbents, the energy companies that Silicon Valley thought that they were replacing, oil, gas, and nuclear moguls, suddenly holding the one thing that AI and artificial intelligence can't function without. And lastly, the public, the people who built the grid, paid for it, and lived beside it. The only army that isn't actually fighting, which in any war makes them the ground everyone else is trying to control. And if you want to know who's actually winning, don't watch the headlines, watch where the money is actually going. Because phase 1 of AI rewarded the obvious winners, the chip companies, the model builders, the cloud providers. Everyone expected that. Phase 2 is rewarding the people who own the electricity, the companies behind the 3 Mile Island restart surge, not because it built better AI, but because it owns the reactors that AI suddenly needed. And utility companies started outperforming expectations. Companies that built transmission lines and transformers and grid equipment began trading like growth companies. The market had figured something out before everyone else. This wasn't becoming a race for intelligence. This was becoming the race for power. And none of them touched the chatbot. They owned the wire, and owning the wire turns out to owning the entire game. Well, there is only one army left to account for: the banks, the ones sitting above the battlefield, funding the winners. Which brings us back to Texas. Back to the stage, the most powerful money manager on earth, a governor sitting beside him. One simple question asks: where is the money going to come from?
And so much of this money, not just the project, is going to be coming from the private sector, from savings accounts, from pension accounts, from insurance companies, and on and on and on. The whole world is in need of improving the infrastructure.
Much of this money is going to be coming from the private sector, from the savings accounts and from pension accounts, from insurance companies, on and on and on. And to be fair to him and to be precise, he was making a prediction, not a threat. And when he says savings account, it doesn't mean the cash is in your checking account. He means a long-term savings, retirement account, 401ks, and pensions, the money you were actually quietly setting aside for the end of your life. That's where he believes the trillions to finance this build-out is going to come from. So hold both halves of it at once. The woman in Loudoun County pays for this war through the power bill on her kitchen counter. And she pays for it the second time through the retirement account that she never checks, quietly being invested into the very build-out that's running power lines past her house. Well, she's paying on both ends, and nobody's going to call that a scandal. There isn't a vote, and there isn't going to be headlines about this. So the next time someone tells you that the AI revolution is about intelligence, remember what it actually runs on. Remember the reactors that they brought back, the giant that agreed to slow itself down, the banker who pointed calmly at your retirement account. Remember who's financing both ends of the wire, and the woman in Virginia, the one who you would never hear her name, whose power bill went up, whose neighborhood is being traded with new power lines, and whose retirement money is already helping to finance this build out. She isn't one of the armies. She's the ground that they are fighting over.